Hey there, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk you through all the tooling, equipment, and supplies you're going to need to have on hand to competently rebuild 700R4 and 4L60E transmissions. So this video is going to be aimed primarily at two interest groups. The advanced DIYer that wants to take that next step into rebuilding his or her own transmission, be it a 700R4 or 4L60E, or someone that's already in the automotive repair industry and wants to get into rebuilding transmissions occupationally and is going to be working on these units fairly often. So what we're going to do is kind of divide everything that you see in front of you into 6 high-level categories. They are foundation, basic tools, equipment, and supplies, bushing servicing tools, sealing ring sizing tooling and equipment, clutch spring compression tools, and measurement checking and validation tooling and equipment. So some of these tools and the stuff you see here in front of you are going to be mandatory. Others may not be, and I will go through and discuss, which one is which, as well as take you through different alternatives, substitutes, and, improvisational methods that are relatively low risk that can accomplish the same thing in lieu of the tool or, the piece of equipment that is otherwise, on the bench here. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I want to discuss foundation, and then we'll kind of move into basic tooling and go from there. So let's talk foundation. And when I say foundation, what do I mean in this context? In a nutshell, it's your workspace. And your workspace is going to consist of 3 primary components. Your workbench itself, whatever means or method you're using to secure the transmission for assembly, and your system of organization. So in other words, how you store your tools and equipment and whatnot. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that latter aspect, but the bench and the method for securing the transmission are going to be fundamental and foundational for your success or not when it comes to rebuilding any transmissions, but in particular 700R4s, 4L60Es. So first and foremost, you absolutely need a sturdy, suitable workbench. Okay, don't try to repurpose old dining room or kitchen tables to rebuild your transmission on. It's just simply not going to work, and it's not going to end well. Okay. The transmission is something that weighs 150, 175 pounds, especially when wet, when you just take it out of the vehicle and you're going to be tearing it down. You can tear it down on the floor, I guess, but again, that's not really something you want to do. You want to have a good workbench, and that workbench could be a multi-purpose bench, and it doesn't have to be a transmission-specific table or bench like you see here. Those can be very expensive, but if you're a DIYer and you're looking to upgrade your bench, your best bet is going to be places like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. And you can also go to swap meets or, search around town for shops that are unloading equipment that are either, they're upgrading and getting new stuff, or better yet, a shop is going out of business and it's liquidating all of its equipment and tools, things like benches and everything else you see here on this bench. And you may be able to get things for like literally pennies or dimes on the dollar. And, that would make for a great score and perfect for what you're trying to do. So when it comes to securing the transmission itself, you have a few different options. So you can go with an engine stand and fixture setup. I have 2 such setups that you see in front of you. Or you can mount your fixture using a base to your workbench. So first, I'll talk about the engine stand setup. Engine stand, kind of like what you see there in front of the tool chest, and if you've watched any of my assembly videos, you've undoubtedly seen this same setup used multiple different times across numerous transmissions. Costs less than $200, and it will last you basically for the rest of your life. So the engine stand itself was $100 or a little under $100 on eBay. The fixture was about $50, and then I had my machinist make an adapter sleeve so that the fixture can work with that particular stand. And I think that was like $50 or something like that. So for around $200, you have something that can easily be rolled around the shop or your garage or whatever. You can store it and get it out of the way when it's not in use. And again, it's a very cost-effective, sturdy option for you and will not let you down in any way, shape, or form. Okay, you can also go with a more expensive engine stand like I have on the right here that's actually holding the transmission. That stand's made by Norco. I'm not going to lie, it ain't cheap. It's got a gear drive, so it's very convenient, but I want to say it was $1,250 just for the engine stand. And that is an insane amount of money to spend if you're just trying to, build a few transmissions or whatever. The fixture itself is made by a company called Superior Machine Fab LLC. They're out of Pennsylvania, and that fixture I want to say was like $300 plus or minus $50 or something like that. Again, I apologize, I don't have exact prices. I'll annotate the video, and I'll also annotate the video for all the different tool numbers or part numbers so that you have those. But suffice to say, unless you're going to be getting into the industry and doing transmissions on like a daily basis and you want to go with an engine stand setup, you do not need to spend that kind of money to have a good, stable, and competent transmission retention system. So the third option, and by far the most cost effective, is going to be the bench mounted system, and that's seen on my other workbench, which I'll show you now. Alright, so the bench here on the other side of the shop is actually the first viable workbench I have ever owned. I bought it like 15 years ago, and I bought the stand and fixture around the same time, or the mount and fixture, I should say. And that setup there, just the mount and the fixture, was less than $100. I got the workbench off Craigslist. I want to say that was about $300 or $400, somewhere in there. But spending, I would say, about $400 to $700 on a really good bench, I think is perfectly reasonable for a DIYer, especially considering the fact that it's most likely going to be used as a multi-purpose or all-purpose bench, not just for transmission building. So I built probably about 100 transmissions on that bench before I decided to upgrade to purpose-built benches. And that was only because I made the leap from doing it as a kind of a side gig or part-time for a little extra money into a full-fledged business and ultimately a career. So again, if you're only going to be doing transmissions once or twice and you just need a good sturdy workbench for all other purposes, spending upwards of around $500-600 I think is a perfectly reasonable deal when it comes to value proposition. Okay, so that's foundation. So what we're now going to do is go to the table, and I'm going to talk through all the different categories of tooling and equipment, kind of discuss what are mandatory and what tooling is optional, and chat through substitutes and viable alternatives, and kind of give you some insight into what you can expect when it comes to working on these transmissions specifically. Basic tools and equipment. This is what I will call a bad news, good news proposition for you. The bad news is that pretty much everything you see here on the left side of the bench, starting with this long screwdriver up to and including that 60-gallon air compressor, is going to be mandatory. In other words, you're going to have this equipment on hand to competently and successfully rebuild 700R4, 4L60E, and frankly any other type of transmission. The good news is that as an advanced DIY or somebody that's already in the business, chances are you have most, if not all, of this stuff in your possession already. So I'm not going to cover every single thing you see here. I'm just going to sketch in broad strokes and focus on a few key things that are absolutely critical. So when it comes to shop air, you absolutely need to have an air source. Okay, you can't really get by without it. It is essential for air checking things like clutch packs, drums, your low reverse clutch pack in the back of the transmission for both 700s and 4L60Es. It is a vital, integral part of the reassembly process, so you need shop air to do it. You also want to have shop air to dry and clean parts off, remove other parts from housings. An example would be like the 1-2 accumulator piston from its housing and the low reverse piston from the back of the case on disassembly. So the question here is, do you need a 60-gallon air compressor? Do you need something that big? That all depends on what you use your air for. If you're using it for things like metal fab, bodywork, paint, you're using a lot of air tools, then yeah, you probably want a 60-gallon air compressor at minimum. But if you're like a lot of folks in the industry and just DIYers in general and are moving away from air tools and more toward cordless and battery powered tools, then I would say no, you don't need anything nearly this big. Something like 20 to 30 gallons is going to be more than sufficient. So you can find air compressors pretty much anywhere auto parts are sold, home improvement stores like Home Depot and Lowe's. Though if you're on a budget, I would recommend you look at Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or swap meets, because chances are you can find a good 20 to 30 gallon air compressor with a hose, an air gun, and some tooling for around $200 or so. And if I was buying one today, that's exactly what I'd be doing. So you absolutely need shop air, but you don't need a 60-gallon air compressor unless you're using it for other, other non-transmission building purposes. All right, so with that said, I want to shift real quick to discuss PPE. That's personal protection equipment. It's a very underrated aspect of auto repair in general. I don't hear it talked about nearly as much in places like YouTube and online and forums and whatnot, but one of the things that you have to be concerned about when working in this industry is your health. So for me, that means protecting my skin, my hearing, and my eyes from all the goings on around me and all the hazards that I'm subjecting myself to when I'm in the shop. So first and foremost, that starts out with a good pair of nitrile gloves. You want to have a healthy supply of these gloves on hand. If you have a Harbor Freight near you, you can purchase their 9mm gloves. I have several boxes of these. This one's running low. And then if you want to complement the 9mm, you can get 5mm. I like these in the summertime too, because these sometimes can rip because it's hot and sticky. So 5mm is fine. And then I will often pair those gloves with an outer set like this. Again, Harbor Freight. I think these are literally $1 for a pair. So I like these because they offer double protection against my skin coming in contact with old transmission fluid, solvents, chemicals, and other things. And prolonged exposure to that stuff can ultimately lead to health problems down the road, especially cancer. Ear Pro, you'll want something to protect your ears when you're using power tools or hammering on stuff. You'll want to keep your hearing for the long run. I would recommend a good set of ear muffs. And then likewise for Eye Pro, okay? Can't really stress this enough. All right, with that said, let's get into the basics as far as tooling and equipment. You're gonna want a good set of picks, straight picks, angle picks, 45 degree, 90 degree. That's gonna be used primarily to remove and reinstall valves or valve trains in the valve body and the pump. You're also gonna want a flashlight to do close inspections. Okay, any flashlight will work as long as it's bright enough so that you can see things like microfractures or other defects in parts that you are inspecting after the cleaning cycle. As far as pliers are concerned, pliers and vice grips. I recommend you have a good pair of vice grips. You're going to use these to grab up on the input shaft when doing your end plate check in combination with dial indicator and base, as well as spinning your shafts just to make sure that there's nothing awry in the case once you've assembled it. As far as regular pliers, I like to have a good pair of needle nose for straight and 45 or, I guess 45 or 90 degree for a variety of different tasks. And then for your snap ring pliers, you're going to need 3 different types. A small reversible set like this for the valve trains and the pump. These take loose and remove and reinstall the I-loop style snap rings for the torque converter clutch lockup valve and boost and pressure regulator valves. I don't know what the tool number is on those, but I mean, they're available pretty much everywhere tools are sold. And then you're going to want 2 pairs of mid-size snap ring pliers. This is a straight set, and then you have a 90 degree set. So this is Snap-on 71CP. You're going to use these for reinstalling all your clutch return spring assembly snap rings. And then this one is going to be Snap-on SRP1. And you're going to use this set primarily for removing the low reverse clutch return spring assembly snap ring. You're going to use that in conjunction with the special compression tool that you'll see in a little bit. All right, let's talk about fastener removal and reinstallation. So I would strongly recommend you have the following. A 1/2 inch impact, it could be air, it could be battery. I'd actually recommend battery, they're a lot more convenient. A 3/8 or 1/4 inch drive impact, a power drill, a cutoff tool, and a die grinder. So you're going to remove all your high torque fasteners with the 1/2 inch drive impact, and I would use that with a 6 inch 1/2 inch drive extension and a 1/2 inch to 3/8 inch adapter. This is a Harbor Freight extension. This is Snap-on. Again, doesn't matter. Whatever brand you have and you prefer, that's what you'll use, and it'll work nicely. 3/8 for all the other fasteners. So your high torque fasteners include your bell housing to case bolts as well as your extension housing bolts, at least in these transmissions. And then everything else is going to be mid to low torque, and 3/8 is fine for that. So let's talk sockets. So for your general sockets, you're going to use a 15 millimeter, 13, 10, 8, and 7/16. The 7/16 is going to be for that line pressure port plug on the driver's side of the transmission. For 700R4s, that's absolutely critical when it comes to setting up and adjusting your TV cable and validating that you have done that correctly via a line pressure test. So you'd screw your pressure gauge into that location, and that's how you would confirm or deny via the readings that you have everything set up correctly when it comes to the TV cable. All right. And then for specialized fasteners, you're going to encounter those with later model 4L60Es starting in 1996 with the 4.3 liter version of that transmission. So GM went to a Torx Plus 50 fastener for the bell housing the case bolts from 1996 to mid-2008. Whatever you do, do not try to use a regular Torx 50 to remove those bolts. You'll strip them out, and then you're going to have to cut the heads off or drill through the bell housing and shear the bolt in half, or use some other method to get the bell off of the case. This socket is an OTC brand tool. It's a 6191. These are like $10 on eBay, maybe even less than that. And I think you can get them on Amazon as well. Now, if you're working on a later 4L60E starting in mid-2008 or so, they went away from the Torx Plus 50 and introduced the Motorq 4 bell housing to case bolt. So this is the specific fastener here. This set is made by Lyle. It's available on Amazon. It's, I want to say, less than $25 shipped to you. If you have Prime, it'll arrive next day. And its specific number is MTS4. All right, if you want to go with the dealership specific socket, it's a Ken Moore brand tool. The number is DT49037 MTS4. This is like $30 by itself. I don't recommend you buy this. Just buy the Lyle set. Lastly, 95 and up 4L60Es as well as 4L80Es, they will have a shift cable bracket. They take Torx 4D fasteners, so you'll need one of these. Okay. Torque wrenches. You need an inch-pound and a foot-pound torque wrench. You want an inch-pound torque wrench with an operating range of somewhere between 10 inch-pounds upwards of 200 inch-pounds or so. This is Snap-on. The tool number is QJD12A. It goes from 5 to 250 inch-pounds. You've seen me use this numerous times on reassembly videos. And then for your foot-pound range for things like pump to case, pump half bolts, and other like-kind fasteners, you want something with a 3/8 drive and a working range somewhere between 5 and 150 foot-pounds or so. This is Snap-on ATECH2F125KB. 5 to 125 foot-pounds is its working range. I like Snap-on stuff for things like ratchets and to some extent wrenches, but you certainly do not need to spend anywhere near the amount of money that these things cost to have a good torque wrench. Any beam or click style wrench will work as long as it's calibrated and it is accurate. Okay, hammers and punches. You want a good size soft mallet, a roughly 2 to maybe 3 pound sled, your ball peen hammer, and then a smaller ball peen hammer for light work. 8 to 12 ounces is fine. As far as drift punches are concerned, you want a brass drift, a mid-sized drift, and then you're going to want 2 roll pin punches. So this is going to be for installing the pump assembly back into the case once it's all completed. This mid-sized drift is going to be great for installing valve trains and other parts into valve bodies and pumps. I like this especially for compressing the AFL spring and the AFL valve and the bore plug so that I can seat it deep enough to install the retainer clip. So that's what I primarily use this drift punch for. These 2 roll pin punches are 3/32 and 1/8 respectively. This one's going to be used primarily for 700R4 roll pins in the valve body, and then your 1/8 is going to be used for the same roll pins, but in the 4L60Es, they're a little wider. And you're also going to use this to remove the roll pin that holds the governor gear onto the body for 700R4s. You don't want to reuse the governor gears. All right, let's talk about screwdrivers and pry bars. When it comes to screwdrivers, you'll want 3 different types, not counting the real small one that I talked about earlier. you're going to want a long flat blade screwdriver just like this with a notch cut in it so that you can remove and reinstall the center support snap ring. And then you're also going to want a good size screwdriver. I would call this an intermediate size so that you can install the priming spring back into the pump. All right, this screwdriver can be used for other tasks as well, but I like this screwdriver specifically for removal of things like the pump, torque converter seal and the extension housing seal, as well as most tasks that you would normally use this size of flat blade screwdriver for. Removal of clutch snap rings and other things like that. When it comes to pry bars, if you don't already have a set of pry bars, I would recommend you buy a set that's designed to be hammered on. And same with the screwdriver. You want at least one of these flat blade screwdrivers you have to be designed to take blows. So these are snap-ons. Again, whatever brand you want to use is fine. Harbor Freight, they have plenty of pry bars, dirt cheap. They work well. I primarily use this medium-sized pry bar just to persuade the pump out of the case on disassembly, and also the selector shaft. And then this little one, I remove the selector shaft seal with. So again, strongly recommended if you don't already have a pry bar set, get a set that is designed to be hammered on with a steel base, because chances are you're going to be using them for other than transmission work, and chances are you're going to encounter a situation where you need to use a hammer and the pry bar to accomplish some task or get something done when it comes to automotive repair in general. All right, so I think I've touched on everything. One tool that you see here that I haven't talked about yet is going to be your pump removal tool. I like that for very stubborn pumps. When all else fails, I just hook that to the pump, and I use the forcing screw that you see there to extract it. And it's kind of a low risk proposition deal for you. All right, lastly, let's talk about supplies. So everything you see here on this little container, little small bolts bin, is going to be essential for transmission building. You want to have two different types of assembly lube. You're going to want the blue type, and then you're going to want the green type. The blue assembly lube is used for general purpose work, so lubrication of lip seals, sealing rings, O-rings, bushings, sealing surfaces like the bases of drums, the back of the case, and anything else that requires this type of assembly lube. The green stuff is much thicker, and it's designed to hold things in place, such as check balls when you're trying to put the valve body back onto the case, bearings, thrust washers, spacers, and anything else that you need to hold hard and fast to something while you're installing it during the course of rebuilding the transmission. So you're also going to have transmission fluid handy. Dexmerk is fine. You're going to soak your bands and maybe your clutches. I don't soak mine, but you can certainly soak yours. You're also going to use it for bearings. You can soak entire planetary carrier assemblies in transmission fluid to prep them for reinstallation, as well as one-way assemblies like your forward sprag and your low roller one-way clutch. WD-40 for valve body and pump assembly for valve trains, and brake cleaner for just general purpose cleaning. I would go easy on the brake cleaner. You don't want to use that stuff too often, especially in a non-ventilated area indoors. If you are going to use it, try to be outside when you're using it. All right, so that's general purpose equipment and tooling. That's took up a pretty sizable chunk of the video. So now we're going to move into the more specialized stuff. And here, some of this stuff is mandatory, but some of it is not. And that's kind of where I can see if I can save you some money in terms of tooling and equipment so that you can still build these transmissions without going deep into the hole when it comes to spending on tools and equipment. All right, the next three categories of tools we're going to discuss are going to involve bushing servicing, sealing ring installation and sizing, as well as clutch spring compression tools. So from a bushing R&R perspective, when it comes to building transmissions, it is always recommended that you replace all your bushings, especially the bushings in the pump, the reverse input drum, and the case for these transmissions, as well as the extension housing. So I wouldn't even think about it in that way. I would just assume to replace all the bushings. Now, with that said, you might think, well, the bushing servicing tools that you see in front of you have got to be mandatory, right? Well, not necessarily. And here's where I'm going with it. These tools are rather expensive. If you're working on 700R4s, 4L60Es, as a DIYer, you're going to need either a transmission-specific bushing driver set, along with some bushing removal tools, or a master transmission building bushing service set. Okay, for the master sets, you're going to spend at least $300. You're probably going to spend closer to $500 or even $600. Now they do make transmission-specific bushing driver sets, including ones for the 700R4 4L60E, and they all use the exact same bushing drivers. There is a set available on eBay. It's like $100 or so, and so if you wanted to spend the money, you figure maybe you might build like 2 or 3 or 4 of these transmissions. It's probably worth it, to be honest. But if you're only going to figure to do 1 or at most 2, you know, during the course of your entire life, you may consider outsourcing the bushing removal and reinstallation process to a shop. So transmission shop can probably going to charge you anywhere from $150 to $250 to R&R all the bushings. So you would bring all your parts to take the bushings, the bushing kit itself, to the shop, and they can go ahead and do the work for you. This way, you know you've gotten the bushings replaced, and you don't have to worry about spending all the money on tooling if it's only going to be like a one-time or at most 2 or 3 transmissions you're ever going to build. Now, if you're that other special interest group that this video is focused on, you know, somebody that's already in the industry or wanting to get into the industry and into the transmission building space specifically, you're definitely going to want to invest in bushing servicing tooling. So that's a master transmission building kit or set, along with a good set of blind hole pullers, a shop press if you don't already have it, and or an arbor press, that also works fine, and slide hammers. So that's basically everything you see here as far as like representative tools. This particular thing is called a bushing cutter. This will make quick work of bushings of whatever size. It's rounded here on the edges so that it doesn't mar up the workpiece, and it will allow you to quickly extract a bushing by cutting it in half with a hammer, you know, smacking on the tool here to remove that bushing. The slide hammers, you can buy on eBay or Amazon a set of like 16 of them, a 16-piece slide hammer and blind hole puller set. They will pretty much remove any type of bushing conceivable based on the light-duty transmissions that you're likely going to rebuild, including 700s 4L60Es. If you're working on TH350s, especially older ones before they move to that output shaft plastic seal, and you have the bushing in there, and most of those bushings are extremely worn, they need to be replaced, you can just drill it out like a 1/4-inch bit, and just chuck it up in a vise, cordless drill, or you know, battery or whatever. Drill it out, and then use either a real small chisel or even this tool to finish it off and get it the rest of the way out. And then from there, you just retro the plastic seal, which are better anyway, and that will take care of your needs for the TH350 and other like kind bushings. All right, let's talk about sizing tools. So these are going to be for your sealing rings on your input shaft and your pump stator. So most of the kits for 700R4s will come with either the one-piece solid Teflon sealing rings for the stator and or the scarf cut sealing rings for the stator. So let me explain and show you what I mean. Alright, so what we have here are 2 sets of sealing rings for your pump stator. You have the solid one-piece Teflon sealing rings, and then you have the scarf cut variety. Scarf cut variety requires no special tools to install. All you do is pre-wind the sealing ring itself so that it hugs the inner portion of the groove, and then you install it and then lather it up with assembly lube to protect it on installation of the pump into the reverse input drum. The turbine shaft also has 2 different types of sealing rings available. I don't have the scarf cut or interlock style. I only have the one-piece Teflon sealing rings, and that's what comes in most of the kits that you're going to buy. So to install either of these types of sealing rings, you know, the one-piece variety, you're going to need some sort of installation tool, expander tool, and a sizing tool. So that's what you see here. So these 3 tools, let me put these kind of out of the way for a second, I'll get to them in a minute, but these 3 tools are going to be your expanding and or sizing tools. There are no expanders, at least I don't have them in my possession, for the stator sealing rings. You just use a 45-degree angle pick to install them, and then you size them with this tool. So lather up the inner diameter with assembly lube and then size them. And then what I would recommend you do is leave this tool on the stator until you're ready to install it back into the case for the final time, or at least to do end plate checks. For your turbine shaft, you're going to use some sort of expander tool to get these rings big enough to fit over the shaft and into their grooves, and you're going to use that in combination with a 45-degree pick to manipulate them into each of their respective grooves. Once they're there, you're going to then kind of preliminarily size them with your, with your hands, and then you're going to finish them off with the resizing tool. Now, this tool set here costs roughly $150 to $200 depending on where you're getting your tools. You don't have to spend that money. All you need to do is purchase a separate sealing ring kit that will come with the scarf cut seals for the pump and the input shaft, and you can just install them as I've described with these. You don't need any special tools, so you can save yourself some money there. And to be clear, there is zero difference in terms of sealing integrity and capability between this type of ring and this type of ring. Okay, I've never ever had a transmission come back to me because I used a scarf cut sealing ring in either the pump or the input shaft as opposed to the solid one-piece Teflon rings. Now, I prefer these rings because I'm just so used to using them, but there's nothing wrong with using these rings. Okay, so that's sealing ring installation, resizing, and expansion. So these other two tools are a little bit more specialized, and they're also optional. You do not need them. This one is a lip seal protector tool for the installation of the forward piston housing assembly, including the 3/4 apply ring, its return spring, the forward piston housing and piston itself into the forward drum. And basically what you do is you insert this over top the inner portion of the drum, the stator of the drum, if you will, and then you install that whole assembly. And then what this does is it protects the inner portion or the inner diameter lip seal on the forward piston from getting marred up. If you don't have this, don't worry about it, because frankly it's a low risk task, and unless you're just simply careless or not paying attention, you're not going to damage that inner lip seal on the forward piston. Likewise, this tool's for collapsing the locking tabs on your wiring harness for 4L60Es and 4L80s. You don't need it because when you're rebuilding these transmissions, you're not going to reuse your harness anyway. To me, it's just, it's not worth the money taking the risk, especially if you're rebuilding 4L80Es. The 60s aren't as bad, but the 4L80E wiring harnesses on higher mileage units are just simply accidents waiting to happen. Limp mode is the result, and a common problem with them is they like to leak through the case connector itself, that portion of the harness that, actually engages the case. You'll see like drops of transmission fluid underneath, or on the ground right underneath that case connector, and that's how you know it's leaking. So this is the tool you would use to collapse the locking tabs, and then you would take something either like this or like a 1/2-inch socket extension to gently tap it through the case without breaking the tabs, so that you can remove the harness intact and reuse it. But like I said, I never reuse wiring harnesses, and I don't recommend that you do either. So all of these tools are optional, basically. You don't need them. All right, let's talk about clutch spring compression tools, because you do need these. These are mandatory. You cannot rebuild these transmissions without these two tools. So 704s for all 60Es, you need two types of compression tools. You're going to need something for low reverse. This is going to be for your low reverse clutch return spring assembly. This, used in combination with those snap ring pliers, the 90-degree, will allow you to compress the return spring to the extent that you can get at the snap ring with the pliers, and then you can remove the snap ring with those pliers, and then ultimately remove the return spring and the piston using your shop air. Reassembly, that's going to literally be the first thing you do when it comes to the case portion of the process. You're going to compress the spring again after you've installed your low reverse piston, and you're going to use the snap ring pliers to install the snap ring. This is going to be for your reverse input and forward clutch drum return spring assemblies. You're going to use this in combination with either an arbor press, a shop press, or some sort of bench or vise mounted compression tool or fixture. So I have a foot press, but I don't actually use it anymore, at least not in the front shop, it's in the back shop. I've gone to using this tool in combination with my shop press for pretty much every single return spring assembly and whatever drum or housing for every transmission I build. So these two tools are available on eBay. They're from the same eBay seller. The seller's name is Transmission Jobber Supply, and he or they make these tools. Okay, they fabricate them, and they are frankly excellent quality. I have a couple of these actually. This is just one of them. So this is $35 shipped, and this is $75 shipped. And then they make a whole host of other tools that you can, buy if you need them. But suffice to say, you need something to compress those return spring assemblies so that you can remove and reinstall snap rings. Okay, this next pairing of tools here is going to be for pump assembly. This is going to be your pump half alignment tool. And then you're going to need something, it doesn't really matter what it is, something to support the pump during assembly. So you're going to have your fully assembled pump body. I mean, this thing's obviously not suitable for reassembly. It needs machine work, but let's just pretend it was not only fully machined, but it has all of its guts inside installed. You would then put your completed stator support over top of it. And no, I'm not even paying any attention to bolt alignment or anything like that, but just trying to illustrate what you need to do. And then you would use this band style alignment tool to align your pump halves perfectly while you went ahead and reinstalled and torqued down your bolts. Okay, these all get 15 foot-pounds. So I get a lot of questions about this particular tool. Where did I get it? Is it available? Can you give me a link? And so forth. Unfortunately, I bought this off eBay about 15 years ago, around the same time I bought that, first, transmission fixture and a few of the other tools that you've seen so far. And I have no idea who I bought this off of. I've long since forgotten that information. But this is a very well-made tool. What most people like about it is this large handle here and a little knob. Most of the tools that you see available today don't have this. And, obviously that's what people want. So if you're handy, you're a fabricator, you can make something like this. And if you can put it into production, you will make a lot of money and sell a lot of those tools because they're very, very in demand. This, I think, is a sun shell or some sort of reaction shell out of a front-wheel drive transmission. I'm not sure which. I don't do front-wheel drives, so I just simply don't know. But if you don't have access to this, you can use your sun shell, the old one that came out of the unit or the new one, and that will work as well to support the pump for assembly. All right, so that covers those three prior categories of tooling. As you can see, you can save some money by using alternatives. You don't have to spend a ton of money on the specialized tooling and equipment that these transmissions otherwise take, because you can get the scarf cut and or interlock style sealing rings. You can outsource your bushing R&R to a shop for cheaper in most cases than it would cost you to spend on all the tooling required. And then as far as clutch spring compression, these tools together are about $100. Okay, and then as far as pump alignment, a large hose clamp could work. And for your 04 and up pumps that take the wedge seal variety, 4L60E 04 and up, you can use the case itself to align your pump halves. So anyway, now we're going to talk about what I call testing, measurement, and validation tooling. Some of this stuff is going to be mandatory, and then others will be optional. To make this short and sweet, everything that you see here in this grouping of tools is mandatory. It is strongly recommended that you have it. I would not rebuild the transmission without these items here. Everything to the rear of them, okay, everything from here on back, is optional if you're a DIYer. Now, if you're getting in the industry to build transmissions for a living, then I would say all this stuff is mandatory. I would not rebuild transmissions for a living without some of these items. So first and foremost, let's talk about our precision straight edge, set of feeler gauges, our dial calipers, and our dial indicator, as well as our multimeter. So for DIYers, for folks in the industry, you're going to have a multimeter. In fact, you're probably going to have several multimeters depending on the kind of work you do beyond transmissions. Okay, you're probably also going to have at least one dial indicator with a magnetic base. This is a Starrett, Mitutoyo, YUASA, Central Tools. They all make good dial indicators. There's probably others. Okay, most of you are going to have a set of dial calipers. You may have a digital variety, or you may have an analog set like this. Everybody and their mother is going to have a set of feeler gauges, at least one. And then you may or may not have a precision straight edge. This is a Starrett. It's number 380, 380. Had to double check that. I wanted to make sure it was an 8, not a 6. So here's how you're going to use these tools. For these, you're going to use these only for diagnostic purposes when it comes to the transmission. You can test continuity on solenoids. You can do voltage tests on transmission in the vehicle. You can test the wiring harness, again, while the transmission is still in the vehicle. You're going to do that mostly to try to find faults with these parts. For your dial calipers, you're going to use this countless times throughout the process for measuring things like selective washers, spacers, snap rings, drill bits. I mean, you name it. Anything where thickness is important as a dimension, you're going to use these. Okay. You may also use the depth portion as well to measure the depth of, say, the pump pocket from the deck surface, so that you can ascertain clearance, and use that in conjunction with your straight edge as well as your feeler gauges to measure the clearance between the top of the rotor and slide to the pump body deck surface. So that clearance range is going to be 1 to 2 thousandths for the slide and 1 to 1.5 thousandths for the rotor. So I have separate videos that cover that process. You could check those out. But long story short, you do not want to be without any of these tools. And for your dial indicator, you're going to use that primarily for measuring your front end play. So again, it's mandatory. You can't be without it. All right, with that said, let's talk about some of these other tools back here. Let me get this kind of out of the way a little bit. So you've seen me use air test plates in numerous transmission assembly building videos. Do you need an air test plate? Especially for these or 700R4 transmissions? I'm going to say no, you do not. You can air check the case fully assembled without any of the case belly components installed, but the servo and all the guts inside the transmission, including the pump installed, by simply using your air nozzle. Okay, I think I show you, or have a couple short videos that show exactly how and where to do that, but you do not need one of these test plates. I want to say they're about $100 and they're sold on eBay and other places, but unless you want to spend the money as a DIYer, I wouldn't bother. Now, as a transmission building professional, it's really up to you. You can spend the money or not. I like them because, I don't know, I think they're neat, and it makes for a nice quick workflow, that part of the process. But again, that's just my opinion. So I don't think these are mandatory at all. I think for most transmissions, you can get by without the use of a test plate. So this is a checking tool. I like this for 700R4s, 204Rs, 4L60Es on this side, and then for the larger diameter side, 6L80s and 90s. Do you need this tool? No, not really. You can use your torque converter as long as the torque converter is new. If you have your new torque converter on the bench, as you're going through the assembly process, you can just take the assembled pump and carefully install it onto the converter, and then once it's fully installed, spin it multiple times to make sure that the pump isn't binding up or there's not some kind of problem. Okay, that's what you're primarily using this tool for. So if you have your converter on hand, then you don't need this tool. Okay, that tool is something like 40 bucks, 30 bucks, something like that. Again, it's up to you if you want to spend the money. This tool is kind of neat to have. If you're a transmission builder, you may want to have this on hand. What it is it's a solenoid test block. The tool number is Kenmore J44246-1. You use it with this jumper harness, and they have the connectors. It's fused, and that comes with this kit. And then you're going to need to have some sort of 12-volt power supply on hand, so a car battery basically. as well as a multimeter, and you can comprehensively test your solenoids for full function, so full spectrum functionality for both electrical or continuity with the multimeter and for mechanical function using this test block. Now, you're not going to test the solenoids for purposes of maybe reusing them because it's just not something you would ever do. Solenoids are cheap in these transmissions, and here I'm talking about the 4L60Es. The 700R4s only have the lockup solenoid, and you're going to replace your solenoids as part of the overhaul. Now, if you're a shop, you may want to ascertain the direct causes behind drivability symptoms. Things like missing gears, no upshift, or other irregularities that could possibly be driven by bad solenoids that have failed mechanically but are still putting out the appropriate continuity. That's where this test block comes in, and it'll work on 4L60Es and 4L80Es. So what you would do is you would put your solenoid in whatever appropriate port here, and then you would connect your shop air hose to one of these connectors, and then from there you would have your jumper harness plugged into the solenoid. You would have this connected to power and this connected to ground on your car battery. And then once you're ready to energize the solenoid, you would simply touch the power supply to the positive power terminal on the battery. So with the solenoid not energized, just sitting in the test block, you're going to hear a whole bunch of air just whooshing through the hose. And then once you energize that solenoid, that air should cut off. That tells you that the solenoid's holding pressure. If it's not, and you know the air continues to whoosh, then you know the solenoid's bad. And that's it. That's what it's used for. So the last piece of equipment I'll talk about is the vacuum test plate for these transmissions. These meaning 4L60Es. They don't make one for a 700R4, and when I say they, I mean Sonics. So for me, I like these things because it makes for, again, a very efficient workflow through testing the valve body. I just go boom, 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 right down, and I can test every single circuit in that valve body in about 5 minutes. Again, if you're a DIYer, do you want to spend the money on this? On top of the money that you would have to spend on the Sonics vac test machine itself, again, that's up to you. If you think you're only going to do 1 or 2 transmissions, then this is another thing where you may want to outsource to a transmission shop. So you would bring all your pieces, your parts that take bushings along with the bushing kit and your fully assembled and clean valve body to the shop, and you would ask them to R&R the bushings for you as well as test your valve body. That might cost you $350. Alternatively, if you want to do that part of the job yourself, you're going to spend about $300 on bushing tooling as well as an additional $500 or so on the vacuum test equipment. So again, it's cost benefit. You know, do your break-even analysis. How many transmissions would you have to build to break even on that capital expenditure? If it's only going to be 1 or 2, you're never going to break even, so that's where outsourcing makes sense. If you think you might build, say, 5 or more, then it might make sense to buy the tooling. That's roughly around the break-even point where it begins to pay for itself. If you think you're going to build 10, or you're going to get into the industry and build an infinite number of them, then obviously you want that tooling. With that said, we find ourselves right back to where we initially started. And so I think we've covered a lot of ground in the video. You should have a really good idea now of all the tooling, equipment, and supplies you need to rebuild these transmissions, whether it be doing it as a DIYer for the first time or just simply somebody that wants to get into the industry and start working on these transmissions occupationally. If there's anything that you want me to cover in more detail as it relates to tools, supplies, and equipment for these units, go ahead, leave it in the comments, and I'll prioritize a video as soon as I can. If there's anything I failed to mention that's critically important, I'll either do a follow-up video or I'll annotate, or maybe both, or pin a comment or update the description. But I think we've covered enough ground to at least get you started and give you a really good idea as to what it's going to take from a tooling and equipment perspective to get into these units and begin rebuilding them. So as always, thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate all your time and your viewership. If there's anything else you want to see at all in relation to these units, I'm always building them. Please put it in the comments and I will do what I can to make a video. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day or evening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks again.